Hey, everybody, I'm Dr. Seth, psychologist. Here's what we're talking about today on Couch Commentary, where I take something that's going on in current events or pop culture and I talk about it from a psychological perspective. Today, we are talking about the Suitcase Killer. This is the 2022 drama that's based on true events. It is called Suitcase Killer, the Melanie McGuire story, and it's on Netflix. This is based on the true story of Melanie McGuire, who was convicted of murdering and dismembering her husband, Bill McGuire. In 2004, 3 suitcases were found in the Chesapeake Bay, and those suitcases contained the body parts of Bill McGuire. So Melanie, his wife, was convicted of these heinous crimes. It is important to note, though, that she maintains her innocence to this day. She is currently serving time in a New Jersey prison, and from reports, it sounds like she will not even have the chance for parole until she is 101 years old. So I just want to highlight 4 different key psychological points that I took from watching this movie. This is really an intense movie, and what a story. And in fact, it's really not a story at all, because this was one family's real life. This was a family's real true life. And of course, anytime one individual is murdered, just think about the number of people that are also affected who were friends and cared about that individual, other family members. The ripple effect of just one murder is astonishing. So the first point that I want to talk about when we talk about Melanie McGuire, and there is a lot of information available about her because this trial was so highly publicized. One of the most striking things psychologically that I think you get a sense of with Melanie is that this is someone who has the capacity to be highly compartmentalized and highly emotionally organized. This is not somebody who appeared to be extremely chaotic in her life in various ways. She was a nurse and mother, and there was an efficiency that she seemed to be able to kind of keep up. That's navigating a lot of different roles, and she did so with organization and efficiency. And that's really something that's worth noting, how compartmentalized she could be. Anytime an individual has the capacity for extreme psychological compartmentalization, everything in its place, and to be efficient and mentally organized, they can be capable of an awful lot of things. Of course, some good, but also if one wants to engage in really bad, negative, nefarious, or even criminal behavior, they can also use some of that same capacity for mental organization to enact some of the negative things that they want to do as well. The second point that I want to bring up is about affect. And what is affect psychologically? Affect is the expression of emotion, and one can express emotion in many different ways. They can do it through body language, facial expressions, they can do it through hand movements, all sorts of ways, but it is the emotional expression, okay? One of the things that's worth noting with Melanie is that many commented on during the investigation process for this murder, and also during the trial, which was a highly publicized trial at the time. Well, there was not a lot of affect that she showed. She was very guarded. There was a high degree of control over the expression of her emotion. There was also noticeably a lack of anxiety. Now, some people would say, listen, you're in certain situations, anxiety would be a really normal, natural, and even kind of healthy reaction to have when you're in certain circumstances. But you really saw a lack of affect with her in many ways, and also a lack of anxiety. The third point that I want to make is one of, I think, the most interesting psychological components of this case, and that had to do with medical knowledge and clinical experience. So, Melanie, as I mentioned, was a nurse. Well, a nurse will have a lot of medical knowledge, also a lot of clinical experience. Nurses, as a rule, will often have much more experience with the body. Nurses may not be turned off or even revolted by blood, for example, in the same way that many other people might who are in a different profession. In fact, a lot of people who couldn't even go into certain medical professions because they really dislike or have a fear so much of seeing blood, being around blood. So, when you think about the conviction of murder and dismemberment of Bill McGuire, it's really important to think about, would a nurse, how would that medical knowledge, that clinical experience, how might that affect someone? This makes me think, for example, about the stereotype of surgeons, and surgeons can be so focused. And in order to do some of the things that surgeons do as a part of their work, opening up bodies, skin, seeing body parts, well, they are able to do so without having an emotional reaction. So when we talk about someone, a nurse like Melanie McGuire, it is a completely valid thing to think about. Would a nurse be more desensitized to things like blood and body parts, some of the things that would be involved in dismembering another individual? Something to think about. And then the final point that I want to make about this case, when we talk about Melanie McGuire, is the term impression management or image management. So, if you saw any footage, for example, of her during the trial, if you saw an interview with her, for example, there is an interview, an ABC interview that I watched as a part of my research in preparing for this video. And she presents as very, very measured, allowing for pauses in between things that she says. Her words seem to be chosen in a very deliberate way. She showed the capacity for socially appropriate and pleasant facial expressions. But what was most salient in the interview that I'm talking about is the cadence with which she spoke. She could have been speaking about, for example, ordering items off a menu at a fancy place for lunch. And yet, at the same time, what she was really talking about was a murder, a dismemberment again. We're not just talking about a murder, we're talking about a murder that was conducted in such a truly graphic way. So, the impression management, the consciousness that she may have about her image and how she comes across. Keep in mind, this is also someone, as I mentioned before, that she has staunchly denied that she committed this murder. So, you really can see this impression management very actively at work. And she's very organized about how she presents. Again, this is not somebody who presents in any way as emotionally chaotic. And I think that's really important. This is somebody who shows the capacity for attention and focus and concentration, and probably as well strategizing. Okay. Now, before I close, I just want to share something that's related to all of these points that I have been making. And again, this comes from the interview on ABC that I watched in preparation. And that was when the interviewer asked her essentially what her experience in prison has been like. And McGuire's answer, I thought, was very psychologically telling. Basically, she said, as I paraphrase, in some ways, it is better than you might think. And at the same time, in some other ways, it's worse than you could possibly imagine. Okay, I'm paraphrasing that. But what's really important to me about that response is that that is a very reasonable response. It is also probably a very smart, wise, mentally organized response. That response synthesizes the complexity of life, having that experience being in prison. She was able to answer that question, not focusing just on one emotional reaction, how she feels about it, but capturing the overall gestalt about what that experience is like for her. So, this is somebody you could tell by that response who is able to see the big picture, who is able to integrate various components of a situation as she then sifts through her different thoughts and organizes what she believes is a clear and rational response. All right. I hope that helps as I kind of share some points that struck me psychologically about this dramatization of this true story, the murder of Bill McGuire and the conviction of Melanie. I'm Dr. Seth, psychologist with Couch Commentary.